Welcome everyone. This is our agenda. So I hope you have enjoyed our refreshments and building community with one another, and hopefully you were able to check out our tables in the back and learn more about some local organizations at CSUMB and beyond. And so we're going to move into a formal welcome and opening, and then we have our 4 esteemed panelists that we will introduce, and we'll hear inspirational stories and learn about opportunities for our own civic participation from the stories that they tell and the advice that they share with us. And then we'll move into questions from the audience. So again, welcome. I'm Joanna Wong. I'm Associate Professor in the College of Education. I'm a Professor of Elementary Literacy in the Elementary Education Literacy, or the Elementary Education Program. And so I teach literacy with an emphasis on culturally and linguistically sustaining teaching to serve multilingual learners. And so I'm also Chief Assistant to the Dean in the College of Education, and I'm Chair of the College of Education Race, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. And so this event is sponsored by the College of Education and CSUMB, and I'm so grateful to have you all here and to have our panelists here. And so just to find out who's in the room, if you are a student, would you please stand? So let's have our students stand. Thank you so much for coming and joining our event today. Let's have community members. If you are a community member, please go ahead and stand up. Thank you for joining us. And let's go ahead and have all faculty, CSUMB faculty and staff who are here supporting the event. Thank you so much for being here. Right, and so I'm just going to share a little bit about my background and some of the story of how I got here today. I'm a second generation multilingual Chinese American. I was born and raised in Oakland, California, where I was fortunate to have opportunities where I felt really connected to my communities. The Laurel District, where I grew up and where my parents still live, the peers in the public schools I went to in Oakland, and also we were fortunate to live near a Chinatown. So Oakland Chinatown was really important to my family, to my grandparents. That was where they shopped, they ate, and where they were able to maintain connections to their cultural practices. And so in my teenage years, I grew increasingly aware of the injustices and the suffering in my local community and also globally. And I felt empowered, and I felt like I had to do what I could to make a difference. So I joined youth organizations like Youth Ending Hunger, Amnesty International, Greenpeace. I started an environmental and animal rights organization at my high school, Skyline High in Oakland, and I believe it's still there decades later. And so I felt like I had to make a positive change in the world, and that's actually one of the reasons why I became an educator. I think education is a human right, and I think that all children should have access and opportunity to pursue education that is affirming, that is high quality, and that is meaningful. And so that's why I'm in education now, and why we're here today, because I want to make sure that we have spaces to grow together and to learn together and find out more about how we can all individually and collectively make a difference in our world. And so along those lines, I want to talk a little bit about civic participation. And so I remained committed to civic participation because I believe everyone should have their basic needs met to live a happy and healthy life. Everyone should be treated with respect and live freely with dignity without oppressive restrictions. So this is liberty. Liberty is something that unfortunately isn't and hasn't been guaranteed for all. And our liberty, the ability to live without oppressive restrictions, is possible when we have a healthy democracy, where local and national governance represents the interests of diverse communities and works towards social equity and justice. So each one of us has an important role in sustaining a healthy democracy, to ensure we maintain our civil liberties, feel safe, and are able to thrive. Today, we have an opportunity to learn more about how our voices matter in local and national governance from our diverse, civically engaged panelists. And so now I will introduce them. So first we have Cassie Biala. She is a member of the Marina City Council. We have Stephen Goings, also known as Quazar, counselor at the Personal Growth and Counseling Center right here at CSUMB. He's also coordinator of the National Coalition Building Institute. We have Chris Lopez, Monterey County District 3 Supervisor, and Lyndon Tarver, President of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Monterey County branch. And so welcome and thank you all for joining us today. And so we have 4 questions for all of our panelists, and I will ask the first question, and then each panelist will respond individually, and then we'll move on to the second question. So the first question today is, please share a personal story about how you became involved in civic duty. And we'll start with Cassie Biala.
Thank you, Dr. Wong, for the invitation to speak to all of you today, and thank you all for attending. It's so nice to look out and see so many people, so thank you so much, and I hope you learn a lot from us and what we have experienced. So my story begins about 6 years ago when I heard about a water issue affecting Marina City, and I heard it from our mayor, and he's still our current mayor, Delgado, and it was the first time that I ever heard of the term environmental justice. And what this was about was that a for-profit private water corporation was going to come to Marina and take our groundwater, millions of gallons a day of our groundwater. And although they were saying it's mostly from the ocean, but we feel that it was mostly groundwater, which is under the jurisdiction of the Marina Coast Water District. But they were going to pump this water, our groundwater, and send it all to the wealthier peninsula ratepayers of CalAm. And Marina would get none of the benefits of a desalinated water. So that was basically what the environmental justice was, and that was 6 years ago. We are still very much involved in this year. You should be hearing more about some of the outcomes of some of the critical lawsuits related to this. But oh, I see, okay, great. So here are just some of the examples of what we produced. And we are 2/3 people of color in Marina, and we have a high poverty rate, so we were very vetted as a marginalized community of color by the California Coastal Commission. And there were three hearings about this, and I can show you these kinds of educational things here. What is environmental justice? We set out to our community. Here we have an iconic sign that we used when we were showing up for the hearings. And we had a series of educational forums at our public library in Marina. And this one says, "Can CalAm steal Marina's groundwater?" So it was a huge effort by our community. And next slide, please. This is an example of a photo of one of the hearings, and there was an overflow room as well as in the city of Marina City Council. They decided that they would also have a screen and that people could participate from our council chambers rather than have to travel that distance to the hearing. And just to encapsulate this, because it was a very big thing, they had in their huge staff reports, they had a whole chapter of environmental justice, and we were pretty much vetted as a classic example. And I just want to read you the quote from one of the staff reports so you understand the significance of this EJ issue. Quote, "The proposed project results in adverse coastal resource effects within the community of Marina that is already disproportionately burdened by many other industrial uses and would receive none of the project benefits. There is a long history of governmental institutions allowing unwanted industrial development to be concentrated in underserved communities of color without their consent. Approving yet another would perpetuate this discriminatory land use practice in Marina." I think that kind of says it all. But when we showed up and all these people of color who normally would never come to these huge Coastal Commission hearings, it brought tears to the commissioners who were touched by the sincerity and the sacrifices of these average lay people. So thank you very much.
Hello everyone, thank you for being here, thank you for inviting us to be on the panel. I'm a spiritual person, so I may come at civic engagement a little differently. In 1989, I was living in San Francisco and attending a mostly LGBTQ omni-faith church called Radiant Light Ministries. One of the stated purposes of Radiant Light was causing people to actualize their spiritual potential and contribute to their communities. One of the ways that Radiant Light did this was to support people in defining their own purpose in life and empowering them to live out of that purpose. Another idea that Radiant Light taught was that in every situation you encounter in the world, there is the opportunity to discover something about yourself. In essence, the world you perceive reflects what is going on inside of you. My purpose in life statement came as a result of events following a powerful dream in the fall of 1990 that demonstrated both ideas. Next slide. So in the dream, I was between two groups in front of the Castro Theater in San Francisco. One group was an African-American church choir, and the other were ACT UP. If you don't know what that is, that's the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, ACT UP and Queer Nation activists. And when I woke up, I instinctively knew that this was an important dream about separation between my own sexuality and my own spirituality. Well, later that very same day, I read in one of the local gay newspapers that the Reverend Larry Leah would be bringing his prayer warriors to San Francisco on Halloween to battle the demons of homosexuality and witchcraft that he and his ilk felt were in possession of the soul of the city. The gay newspapers were outraged and were determined to whip up a counter-demonstration from the gay community. Now, having just had this incredible dream the night before, in keeping with Radiant Light philosophy, I knew this was telling me something about myself. Where did I stand? After much prayer and meditation, I came to this realization. This was an opportunity to take a stand for peace and to begin to heal the societal conflict between sexuality and spirituality by healing the sexual-spiritual conflict within myself. So on the evening that the prayer warriors were to arrive at the Civic Center, I spent the morning in prayer. I prayed that no violence would erupt between the groups and that in some small way I might be used to heal some of the division and misunderstandings between the groups. As day turned into night, the prayer warriors began to arrive en masse by bus. Many members of the gay community and other counterculture communities arrived to protest, and the police were called in to set up barricades between the two groups. In considering the fact that the police actually put up physical barriers between the groups, in believing as a Christian that we each have a special calling, and in believing as a member of Radiant Light that we each have the opportunity to extract lessons from every circumstances in our lives and to transform those lessons into blessings, I created my own personal mission statement, which is this. My purpose in life is to break down the barriers between belief systems and to support all people in finding their own personal paths to spirit, healing, and fulfillment. Next slide, please. Last slide. To be clear, at the core of all structures of oppression are supremacist belief systems. At the core of racism is white supremacy. At the core of sexism, homophobia, and transphobia, male, cis, and heterosexual supremacy. Therefore, to overcome these systems of oppression, it is necessary to work at both the policy, structure, and institutional levels, like civil rights organizations like the NAACP, and at the values level, like organizations like the National Coalition Building Institute that focuses on prejudice reduction. And that's what I've tried to do.
My name's Chris, and I'm hoping that, as politicians often do, I can just answer the question in a slightly different way, not direct, but I'm going to give you guys the moment that for me so far has defined my time in office. As soon as I got elected, I went on this mini tour. I went throughout the district after being elected to spend time in schools, talking to kids about what they saw as issues in their community. So, as I typically would expect, I got a lot of requests for Disneyland, it should be brought to my community, we need more pizza stores, we need a Starbucks on campus, the usual list. But what stopped me dead in my tracks was a group of kids in the community of San Lucas. San Lucas is a town of about 850 people in southern Monterey County, south of King City. It's primarily a farm-worker community, about 95% Latino, and their water went bad about 13 years ago. And when I say it went bad, I mean it went bad. When the water runs, it runs brown and black and yellow and every other color in between. It stains their clothes, and it ruins every device they have in their home, from dishwashers to clothes washing devices or water heaters. So I walked in there expecting the kids to talk about their fear of the tap, because most of these kids were 12 to 15, meaning in their lifetime, they've never been able to use the water in their hometown. I had a great conversation with them, and the room felt quiet. They felt completely silent. Nobody wanted to be the first to tell me what they wanted, what they thought their community deserved. And so I left them with a challenge. I said, I knew they were going through a letter writing portion of their curriculum, and I said, write me letters. Let me know what matters to you. About 3 weeks later, I got a really thick packet in my office with letters, and started going through them, and I think it was the second letter that was the first one that made me cry. Right? And every other letter just had me in tears. They were all asking for the same things. There's really only 3 things on the list, but unexpectedly, the one at the top of the list was sidewalks. I had never stopped and looked at the community of San Lucas in terms of infrastructure. This tiny town, these kids were begging for sidewalks. And their reasons, talking about a little sister being hit, or the way they can't walk to school when it's raining because the side of the streets would turn to mud and then they'd have to walk in the road, and neighbors would drive by honking at them, not being patient for them in those moments. That's what they wanted most for themselves. It took me 2.5 years, but those kids each got a golden shovel. We called them our letter writers. After a lot of back and forth, those kids sank shovels into the ground and broke ground, and now every street in San Lucas has a sidewalk. Not only that, every street in San Lucas got repaved. And the day we did that, a man came up and gave me a huge bear hug. He said, "Oh, my daughter is one of the letter writers, and you've changed her life." He said, "But more importantly, I moved here 53 years ago as a young boy, and we were promised new streets that year. It never happened. But because she wrote you a letter, and because she and her classmates spoke up, look, I have new sidewalks." Those moments for that group of kids, I know, is answering the question, what is getting them started in civic life, right? And getting them civically engaged. And I say that because their teachers have told me, "You're the reason." I'm the reason for what? And they're like, "Man, that kid is a pest. They do not let it go. They keep coming after me." They say, "Well, change the curriculum. If it's not right, then fix it. Don't just leave it the way it is." Good. We've created agitators in the best way possible. Now, number 2 on that list was drinking water. Unfortunately, we're coming up on 15 years, and we're still not there. It's a state responsibility. We've been pushing on it, and it's going to be about $15 million. If they would have fixed it when we asked for it, it would have been 7, but now with inflation, we're looking at 15. But I'll end by saying number 3 on their list was streetlights. Right? Later nights out, playing on the street to those kids was a priority. Last night, it's not official yet, we haven't ribbon cut, we haven't done anything. Last night though, the first lights got installed. They're solar, so the community doesn't have to pay for that power, and they turned on. And we didn't tell anybody they were coming because we like to under-promise and over-deliver. But man, last night at about 7:30, my phone lit up. People were sending me pictures. "Have you seen this?" And it was just half the streets are lit up. The other half is still under construction. but they were so excited. And those kids, they've started their path to civic engagement and to truly changing lives by using their voice, which is what I hope each one of you will do, and help encourage others to do. Because so many of us, coming from a primarily Latino community, don't feel seen, don't feel heard. But when you use your voice and something happens, you start, right? You start to engage even deeper. And I'll share that we do listening sessions throughout the community out of my office. A lot of times you show up and 2 people show up, 3 people show up. But what we found is when those 2 to 3 people make an ask and you give them a win, you make change on their ask, the next time you come back, there's 20 people. That's the first time we ever did one in the tiny town of San Ardo, we had 4 people. I remember feeling so defeated driving home that night, but we got 2 wins out of that meeting. This year when we showed up, we bought 1 coffee traveler and about a dozen cookies. Kind of stung from the last time, right? 72 people showed up. And man, they had their list ready. All right, we've got our list. So my piece is engage and give people wins, no matter what role you take on in life, and you'll empower them. And that is the most powerful thing you can give somebody is their own voice.
My name is Lyndon Tarver. I'm the president of the Monterey County branch of the NAACP. Who ever heard of the NAACP before? What do they do you know? Do you know what the NAACP does? What have they done for you lately? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. So, in Pacific Grove Unified School District, we had a lot of problems there. Anyone from Pacific Grove in here? You can don't be scared to raise your hand, it's fine. So they have a problem with this thing called racism. Anyone heard the word racism before? So until last year, 2023, the students of Pacific Grove Unified School District couldn't wait to graduate and leave PG. Now they got a new superintendent in there. I think we turned in the corner. We got NCBI there. We got Black. We got the NAACP. And I think we got Little Black in there as well. We're going to change the culture of PG. Starting with the school district. Because everyone is a taxpayer and they deserve to have dignity and respect. And the NAACP put our foot forward to make sure to get it. PG is not the only school district that have problems. They all have problems. So my job as the president is to make sure that you're represented. We don't have a youth council, but we can start one here on the campus. You can use your voice. How many voters do we have out here that's registered to vote?
Everyone should be raising their hand.
Everyone should be raising their hand, yes. Because if you don't vote, you don't have a voice. If you don't vote, whatever happens, you don't have a say-so. Use your voice. If you need us to help you register to vote, we can do that as well. I think I'll close with, oh, by the way, I'm the only one on the stage I think is not from California. I'm from Texas. If you've never been to Texas, that's okay. We can get rid of that governor we have that sooner or later, right? Well, Catholic from the south side of Chicago. For me and Catholic. But if you be good and say your prayers at night, when you die, you go to Texas.
Our second question, and we'll start with Stephen, is why is voting so important for us to sustain our democracy?
Well, that's a big question. Voting and voting suppression are the primary methods that regulate how much or how little we can be considered a democracy in the face of other powerful influences that work against democracy. We're not primarily a democracy. We are primarily a constitutional federal republic with a capitalist economy. In a very real sense, it was not until the passage of the 1964 Voting Rights Act that the United States could be considered anything close to resembling a true representative democracy. But in a capitalist system, those individuals, property owners, and corporations at the top of the economic pyramid control all the levers of political and financial power except the cumulative power of the popular vote of the economic base. Therefore, moneyed interests are always seeking ways to limit the popular vote of the masses while exploiting their labor. Thus, slavery, thus the Chinese Exclusion Act, thus mass incarceration, thus felony disenfranchisement, thus non-citizen migrant workers, and thus so-called illegal immigration. Next slide, please. In the popular imagination, voting is about choosing the policies and policymakers that you wish to support. And because rarely is any single vote determinative, this leads to the widely held belief that our individual votes don't really count. But fundamentally, voting is part of the class struggle between rich elites on the one side, whose only real check on power is the popular vote, and on the other side, the poor, working, and middle classes of the masses, in which voting is their only true collective power outside of riots and civil disobedience. So in this sense, voting is more about protecting individual civil and human rights, which are under constant threat by powerful elites who favor either plutocracy or theocracy. So I don't have time to get into it here, but if you want to see this play out in real time, simply study the electoral history, the electoral presidential history from Obama till today, and you'll understand what I'm talking about.
I think we're living that history now in terms of what Stephen was talking about, right? We're still seeing a lot of that oppression and a lot of those tools being used against communities of color throughout the U.S. So I agree with everything you shared. And my request, though, to each one of you, in speaking about the importance of voting, is to do it under the influence of information, right? And not just the headlines. Pull those out of the way. Make sure you read 3 to 4 sources, right? Give Prop 1 right now that's out there, right? A lot of folks, you're seeing a single message coming at you, which is it's for veterans and housing, and do it. I'm gonna tell you right now, I'll be honest with you, I'm not supporting Prop 1 because that money, they're saying there's no new taxes. A lot of people get uncomfortable when I say that, and I ask them, why are you moving in your seat? I've had some tough conversations with friends. I say, because I support veterans. I say, I support veterans too. But that money, while they're promising no new taxes, is coming from mental health systems within counties today. Those are dollars that are being pulled back and serving children in our community, right? That to me is a really tough question. When it's said it'll address homelessness, we've been told that it's best, it's going to put 4,500 units into play. But we know there's 180,000 people at minimum currently unhoused in California. So am I willing to trade off that early identification and addressing behavioral health issues in our communities for what we know will be taking these dollars mostly to urban areas to build 4,500 units and address a different issue when the voters who initially created it wanted it in our communities with local control? Personally, I'd rather see it in our communities addressing rural communities like the southern part of Monterey County. It's a tough issue because right now there is no counter message. There is no dollar being put against that, the one message you're seeing on social media saying it's all about veterans and nothing else. My ask of you is vote, but under the influence of information. Make up your own mind, read 5 or 6 sources, because if you don't do that, then when we talk about plutocracies, theocracies, and the control of the message, that is how they win. But when you study the issue and make up your own mind, we all win. Because it's those tough, crucial conversations you'll have over dinner parties, conversations with friends at the post office, where you'll be better influenced, but it only happens if you commit yourself to seeking out that information. So.
Well, I am a veteran. And there's a few veterans out there. Could the veterans please stand, please? If you're a veteran, please stand. Thank you for your service. So I've been in California 17 years. So I'm new to California, but I'm new to the United States as well because 17 years before that, I was in Europe for 17 years. So when I came back to America, it's not the America I left. I saw a lot of homeless folks. Not only am I a veteran, I'm a combat veteran. So I went to combat to make sure to fight for America. The America I see now, I don't know. I'm new to it, 17 years. I didn't go to put my life on the line to come back for you to squander your vote. A lot of people fought and died so you can vote. Everyone, no matter your ethnicity or your race, everyone can vote. So when people tell you your vote don't matter, don't fall for the misinformation, disinformation. It matters. If it doesn't matter, why is it trying so hard to take away from you? I have voted since the age of 18. I grew up in a household of a grandmother and a mother, Democratic, I might add. And I had to vote. And every year I have voted. I kept up when I was overseas, kept up with voting, because it matters. And please, please, please vote. All right? Don't let anybody tap you in the back and tell you vote don't matter. But young folks, you can make the difference. The future belongs to you, but only if you vote. And be informed when you vote. Don't take anyone's word for propositions or these measures. Read for yourself. And the politicians that run for office, ask hard questions. Don't be duped in saying you know what they're going to do. Ask them the question. When you vote for them and they don't do what they're supposed to do, they got to run again. Just remember that. Thank you.
Why is voting so important for us to sustain our democracy? I'm going to be giving two examples of things that I encountered personally and was an active protagonist in these election issues. I want to give a word of caution for those of you who might be a little uncomfortable with some graphic language and actually some very raw bigotry. Please don't look at and read the next two slides. I have taken out, redacted quite a bit on it, but it is still shocking, and I will explain a little bit of the history, so please don't read the next two if you have some feelings about some of the language and thoughts that are portrayed in here. Okay, so this was an issue in the 2018 election, and I unexpectedly learned that one of the candidates running for re-election of a third consecutive four-year term in a public agency in our jurisdiction. And when I saw the kinds of comments that were in his public tweets, I was shocked and alarmed and really disgusted. And as a person of color, I had to do something about this. So I went to our mayor again, and I said, Bruce, how do we stop this person from being elected? And he knew the way to do it, and we filed for a committee to oppose local measures. And let me tell you that it was very scary for me. I have never done something like this, and when you come out like this, you almost feel that you're going to be under more attack than the actual person who made these kinds of comments and had these kinds of public positions. And even when we collected $3,000 so we could produce this flyer to the voters, people who donated were very afraid. The people of color were afraid that if I donate, will my name be put out there as a donor to this campaign? So if, for your information, if you donate under $100, $99, then you can not be publicly recognized as a donor to any campaign, or in this case, a committee. So you can see the kinds of, you can do the next page, this is the front and then the back also. Just read the stuff in the middle to see, you know, the kinds of stuff that was put up. And these are absolute quotes, and I even had to go through and try to figure out which ones would be even sanitized, because they were even worse than the ones publicly put in this flyer. And by the way, a designer for the brochure did it pro bono, plus we went to a printer in Santa Cruz who supported the initiative, and they just checked out with the Maine post office to make sure that this was an okay thing to put out there in the public, and they said yes. So this is you know, a kind of thing that you might find yourself so moved in a negative way that you must do something about it, even though you're afraid. So I just wanted to put that out there. Then in 2020, in my election for the Marina City Council, I encountered a lot of racism as well. And you have it up. And it was a traumatic election for me. I and a Hispanic woman of color, the two of us were running and breaking the barriers. No other people of color, women, had ever been elected to the council. So we were the first. And in doing so, you know, I had accusations of me being a racist, and by definition, by the way, people of color cannot be racist because the definition says there's a power structure involved in the prejudices and discriminations. But that's a typical kinds of comments that is a defensive posture for oftentimes racist people, but I was accused of that. And then even the complaint process at the final tail end of the election process was deeply flawed. We were under the gun of a very gerrymandered electoral map, as well as an unconstitutional campaign ordinance, but we did prevail. And this year I was appointed by our city council to head up a DEI task force in the hopes of the kinds of things that we experienced would never happen again. And next slide. And just so you know how our votes count, this was the final count. I had 70% of the voters. My opponent had almost 30%. That is a 40% point margin difference, which is a huge landslide. 10% is considered a landslide, and mine was 40. So it is so important for you all to be voters, and I thank you for going to the polls in March and November. And we can make a difference, as you see. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our third question, and we'll start with Chris. What is one way we can be more civically engaged in our everyday lives?
All right, so I'll give you two really quickly. Again, I make up my own rules. One is actually next door right now, there's actually a training for poll workers. Get involved. That is such a fun way to be involved. When I'm not on the ballot, I volunteer. So I've driven ballots back, collected them at the end of the night, and taken them back to the elections department. I've worked polls. It's an amazing way to meet people who are similarly minded, not always of the same politics, but who are interested in making a difference. In fact, the last time I drove, I picked up ballots in Marina and drove them back to the headquarters for the elections department. And the woman I rode with, because you have to have two people in the van at all times, was talking about how she was so interested in serving on the cemetery board. So this brings me to the other way you can get involved. So this morning at the Board of Supervisors meeting, I finally had a vacancy and appointed her. She now sits on the Soledad Cemetery District because she had mentioned to me that she was so interested in serving there because she had a parent in that particular cemetery and she wanted to make sure she put in her piece. The county has so many different opportunities for community to serve on special committees, special districts, and I can think of the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, the Commission on the Status of Women, all the different cemetery and water districts. There's a lot of opportunities, no matter what your interest might be, to get involved and start giving back, and you don't have to, you typically have to be a registered voter of the district that you're going to represent on that body, but you don't have to own your own home. A lot of people try to throw that up in front of folks, that, oh, you have to be a homeowner to sit on this board. And when we talk about suppression, there's only one committee I'm aware of that's left in Monterey County where you have to be a homeowner or property owner within the district. We've been most of them. But get involved. If there's something you're interested in, engage on that. There are opportunities to give, but you get so much in return when you serve on those bodies.
So traditionally, women vote more than men. And as I look around the room, we got more women in here than we do men. So this is the voting block right here. Who's going to elect your next mayor, next city council, and next supervisors, as well as senators. So where is your male counterparts? Why aren't they here? Good question. I guess basketball must be on TV. So make sure they're registered to vote, and make sure they go ahead and vote. Because the only way you can make a difference is to vote. As I look around the room, look like we have some very dedicated voters in here. Because you're interested in the issues. That's why you showed up. But let's have a pledge here. And when you go to vote, you take someone with you. Can we pledge for that right now? If you want to pledge that, please stand up. If you pledge, take someone with you when you vote today. I guess. Take someone with you. Come on, you can do it. Everyone should be standing up, right? Come on, back in the back. Y'all can do it. Or who already voted by mail? Thanks. The good thing we got a politician up here to tell, right? But make a pledge, because if you like your lifestyle right now, all right, if the wrong person get in the office, that's all going to change. If you don't like your lifestyle now, don't vote. I guarantee it's going to change. I guarantee it.
So this was my first year after being elected. Our city wanted to find out from the general public, where do you want us to spend your money? What about the budget priorities? So we sent out this 5x7 postcard to everybody in Marina, and we asked, what are your priorities? And this survey was done by a CSUMB professor, and she analyzed the results as well. So next slide. So this was the respondent rate by race and ethnicity. And I know that's a little small to read, so the most important part here is this. This is the whites who responded. And this long bar here says 59, that's 59% of the people in the survey were white. And this is the number, 36%, that they are represented in our census. Now, all the other races are the opposite way, right? Like the Hispanic or Latino, they represent 31% of Marina, and yet only 12% responded to this survey, okay? So you understand, out of all of this 647, what were the majority racial breakdown of this survey? Next slide, please. So here are the results of the survey that showed that the people who responded want to fix the sidewalks and street as the first priority, then the city parks, then the long-term community planning and recreation and cultural services is the fourth, all the way down. And look at this, diversity and social equity is on the bottom, right? So what could you conclude from this? That the city of Marina does not value diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? From this survey. And 647 is not a bad number, but it's, it's also not representative of our 23,000 people. But next slide, please. So I asked the data analysis person, what if we took that last DEI question and we broke it out by race? And she said, yes, we can do that. In the next council meeting, I will show that. And sure enough, what do we have here? We have African Americans with a high priority rating for DEI, followed by Hispanic and Latino, and white and Caucasian at the very bottom. Okay, so that is an example of how if we don't participate, if you don't participate in the surveys, then certain conclusions are going to be the word of the day, right, if we don't participate. So I'm just leaving you with that. I have some other examples of this, but unfortunately, I don't have time to go into those. But I want to say that it is so important for you to participate in local government. You do have a voice, and particularly because our cities in this Monterey County are not 500 million people, okay? So we will have a good voice. And I want to leave you with a most important question. If I say that people of color must participate, my question to you is, how do we do that? How do we get people of color to participate in our local government? And we can go on for another couple hours just on that question, but I want you to think about that because that is your challenge. Thank you so much.
Because I can be long-winded, the first two answers I read to keep within the time. This one I'll do a little mix. But I want to say that from the beginning is that voting is the bare minimum. That's the bare minimum of civic engagement. But for sustained civic engagement, it's necessary to devote some time, some money to organizations that you care about and that reflect the world that you want to see. Which is not to say that that's easy. One of the primary tactics of the rich and powerful is to keep the poor and working classes too busy and too destitute to have surplus time and money. This is why voting is not a holiday, it's on a weekday, right? And then they keep the middle classes just comfortable enough to deter them from taking considerable risks with their activism. So I think what's important is that we all identify what our communities of struggle are and what our communities of privilege are. So as a Black person, as an LGBT person, as a person with disabilities, those are my communities of struggle. So I'm always paying attention to those particular issues. But I also have communities of privilege as being a man. So the slide that you just showed, where white people were much more concerned about sidewalks than diversity and equity, that's not all white people. Right? There were some white people who were concerned about diversity and equity, and so I say to look at your communities of privilege, because one of the things the things that makes it hard to have people of color involved in other things, such as maybe in the environmental community or the peace community, is because they are spending so much time just on their own issues. If our allies were actually supporting our organizations. So I say if you're a white person, you should be joining a committee of the NAACP. If you are a straight person, you should be involved with any of our local pride organizations. If you're an able-bodied person, you should be involved in something that has to do with disabilities. So look at what are the communities that affect you directly, and spend some time working there, but also look at what your privileges are and what communities that you can support.
What is one thing we should remain cautious about?
Being an Army vet, I think you should be cautious of everything. You should believe nothing you hear and half of what you see. Because folks will spoof, provide misinformation, disinformation, anything to trick you. There's a lot of con folks out there. I don't want to say con men, it's con women as well, right? That's why you must be astute and read. Read everything, especially with dealing with elections. Read everything. The measure might say, read the measures and read the person who endorsed the measure, who brought it to the ballot. Follow special interest groups. That's what controls most of us, but most of politicians, right? And most of our issues, special interest groups. And you can even join a couple of those special interest groups. But make sure it fits your values, your morals, your character. Like I said, misinformation and disinformation. Watch out for it. It's everywhere.
Okay, so first thing I want to say is again what we've all been saying the whole evening, is participate. And especially people of color, practice speaking up in public. Our voices matter. Show up to give our opinions on issues. Show up to protest when things aren't right. Support those who are advocating for anti-racism, and be a collective voice of power. And get on commissions, subcommittees, participate in local surveys. And the worst one is run for public office. I was probably the most reluctant public candidate for office, so if I chose to run for office, any of you out there can also do it as well, okay? And it's very, very important. But my one caution is when you prod the sleeping bear of systemic racism, do expect that you're going to get pushback and forces mobilized against you. That is just the reality. It's not a Pollyanna-ish world out there, and you should expect it. Expect ugly comments like "you're the racist" is what I experience, and also expect that retractions of support that you thought was there from anti-racists are going to be there for you once you speak out. The saddest part in that first example that I gave about the racist candidate, he actually came in 5th out of 5 candidates for 3 positions. So we won, if you want to say it that way, but that wasn't the most learning experience for me. What happened is that other folks who were in that public agency, either elected officials or candidates and staff, called me and really harassed me about not sending that postcard out, because despite their belief in anti-racism, they wanted another candidate to win, they wanted that candidate to win over another candidate, which was not even in my thought process. I didn't care who won. I only cared that somebody like this would not be representing our public. And so that is something, sad lesson that I learned, but it is true. So I caution you that when you stand up, don't be naive, but do anticipate that you're going to get some ugliness back.
So the question is, what is one thing we should remain cautious about? I'm going to say infighting. One of my adages that I made up myself, that I use, is that hearts unite, minds divide. You are never going to get complete agreement, even on your own side. And I have been in so many different organizations, and what I see is people getting stuck on their tactics and stuck on their personalities and power stuff. And sometimes the opposition that we have coming towards us is so great that we cannot afford to be divided. So what's really important is that we cultivate the ability to make amends, to reconcile, to not be stuck in our opinions. Because if we are, what happens is the organizations that you're all fighting for the same thing, but you'll get stuck and you'll stop participating, and people will stop coming, and you start breaking up. And one of the things about power and oppression is it is always it's always seeking to divide us among ourselves. And we do the work of our oppressors when we are fighting amongst each other. So I think the infighting is the thing that you have to be most careful about.
2 things that I want you to be cautious of are comfort and perfection. Comfort, because if you're in a room where everybody thinks exactly the way you do and you're speaking into a sounding chamber and you're all nodding along, it doesn't mean you're in the right room. It means you're in the room that you're most comfortable in. But as a country, as a city, as a state, as a campus, you have to be in the dialogue with others at some point. You have to go back and forth. Because if you want to help change the reality in which we're living, that's where it happens. It happens in the minds and hearts of everybody who's impacted, not just everyone who agrees with you. So if you're comfortable all the time, you say, I found my clique, we're in, this is it, probably in the wrong rooms. Seek out a little bit of good conflict or disagreement so that you can have that dialogue, because in that space is where I believe change happens. And the other piece is perfection, right? When you get into it, and even with my board, right, we sit up there, we don't agree on everything. Today we had a tough one, Auditorium, flood it out. We knew for years there was issues there, investments weren't made, but the state gave us $20 million to invest in Auditorium to make a difference. But we've been going for about 6 to 8 months with disagreement on how we're going to spend those dollars. And the community is saying, I've got bills to pay. And it wasn't just us disagreeing, we had community members forming groups, and the group was showing up, we are the coalition of, we are the alliance of, and nobody could come to agreement. How much should the businesses get, how much should the residents get, how should that be broken out formulaically? And at the end of the day, my thing today on the dais was, I've got people here worried about mold in bedrooms, I've got folks worried about couches no longer being viable, but it's the only option. Let's move the needle. Let's just go, knowing that we'll adjust as we move. So don't always look for perfection, sometimes look for improvement, knowing that the door never closes, and that is the beauty of America. You can always vote in somebody better, or with better ideas, or push for a better initiative. But don't be afraid of progress, and let that fall by the wayside because you're looking for perfection.
Wonderful. Thank you to all of our panelists. We are going to continue and move into more of this dialogic space with questions and answers from our audience. So we have Dr. Vanessa Lopez Littleton, Interim Chair of the College of Health, Science, and Human Services, and Dr. Christy Cervantes, who is Assistant Professor in Human Development and Family Science, who are going to walk around with microphones. If you have comments and questions for our
Hello, girl. I'm an interim dean. I'm not an interim chair.
Sorry, Interim Dean.
But I do have a question to get us going. I was thinking about how important representation is in local leadership positions, particularly for diverse populations. And I'm asking this question because I'm curious about your life course. If you've had role models, mentors, sponsors, coaches who look like you, or in those who supported you in achieving your current status as a public servant. Have you had people who look like you, and how important is that representation?
Just share, for me I did, and I'm very fortunate because that person was a trailblazer, one of those people who kicked down doors, and he was a man with vision, meaning when he got to that next floor, he didn't burn the ladder behind him or kick it over. He dropped more ladders down for young people coming behind him. His name was Simon Salinas. He was the first Latino mayor in Salinas' history. He was the first Latino elected to the assembly out of our region. And he made incredible changes for our community. And in that, the most important one is he dropped down ladders to bring up people like Luis Alejo, who came behind him into the assembly, and Robert Rivas, who's currently the speaker, coming out of a tiny community out in San Benito County. That's only possible because Simon showed us the way, and when he got there, he opened up doors. And for me, what I say is my mentor is when I had graduated from college, I came home and asked him if he would have lunch with me. We had gone to the same college, and so I felt a kinship. And he said, absolutely. And I asked for a job, and he said, I've got no money. The county, it was 2008. We were in the middle of the Great Recession. We just laid people off. I said, I'll work for free. And he said, you can start tomorrow. We start at 7:30. You're the first one in the door. But his willingness to open that door for me got me to the point where 9 years later, he called me on Thanksgiving and said, I think you're ready. If you're willing to run, I will step aside because I think you would be great at this job. So to have somebody willing to do that and retire and step aside and say, because I see your potential, is something I hope you all find in this world. But absolutely, that representation to me mattered. And calling on him and having him answer and open so many doors and drop down ladders made a world of difference in my life.
Well, let me answer I'll answer in two ways. One, some of the people that I share identities with who are mentors for me. Certainly Helen Rucker in the Black community, Matt Garrigan, who's the leader of the church that I was involved in San Francisco, LGBT, Margaret Keith when it comes to disabilities. But I'll also say that there's a caution here when it comes to people who look like you or share an identity with you does not necessarily mean that they're going to be representing your interests. You know, and I look no further than Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court, who was put in the seat of Thurgood Marshall by Republicans, because he's technically black, but he is not, in my view, a representative at all of the black community. And this is something that you can do if you start tokenizing people. So if you want, if you're gonna, you have some sort of board and you want somebody who's gonna be representing the black community or representing the LGBT community or representing the disability community, it's not enough that they have that identity, but that they are involved in that actual community.
I wish I did have somebody that looked like me to be a mentor, but I didn't. And so I understand the importance of the question, and I thank you for that, but I didn't have it. My mentor actually turned out to be our mayor, who is Hispanic and male, so not like me at all. But I have to tell you how important the question is, and that when I was campaigning, I went to a home, and it was an Asian man and his little girl, must have been 4 years old, and the father and I were talking, and the little girl is pulling on her daddy's shirt tails, and he bends over and they're whispering something, and she says to her, he says to me, she saw your picture on the posters around town, and I melted. I thought, this is why I'm doing it, so that she saw somebody like me who looked like her that is doing something important in the town. And I think that that's why we need to be representative of our different ethnic and racial groups. So thank you.
I think my biggest mentor was my mother and grandmother. My grandmother was the matriarch of the family. I see her walk to work. I see her get up when she didn't want to get up, cook when she was tired. So, to me, black women has always been the matriarch of the family, the rock. And although I'm a male, I think females are stronger than men when it comes to families and family values. So, probably my mother and grandmother is my mentors. Thank you for that.
Hi, this is kind of a collective question. I think I speak for a lot of people who are in the room right now as teachers. What does civic engagement look like for students K through 6, or just like us, we're first grade teachers? So what does it look like for a 6-year-old? What are your ideas for that?
It's never too early to start civic engagement. And let them know what's right looks like and what wrong looks like. Just start them early. And I think EO is early and often. That's the key, I think. So by the time they hit 18, they already know what right looks like and what wrong looks like. EO.
There was an old country music song that said something like, "I'm sorry, son, you're too young to vote," right? And I don't remember who it was, but that line always stuck with me, like, you're not 18 yet, you don't matter. And I think breaking that down by engaging, inviting your elected officials into the room, and forcing them to be in that space and see how they interact, I think is really cool. I've had fun with first graders, I've had fun with kindergartners. We use the pizza analogy because I'm a county supervisor, so the pepperonis are the cities, which I do not have direct representation over in that form, but outside of that, I get to make all the decisions, right? So learning how to break it down and bring it to their level and then end it with a fun activity. And what I mean by that is, what can they vote on, right? So one of the last classrooms that I visited was a 3rd grade class, and the teacher told me that the kids were really into fruit trees. So in the end I said, I know you guys are into fruit trees and there's a space for one out there, what kind of tree do you want? Oh, and it turned into an election. Like, well, I want apple. Well, no. The persimmon was on the list, pear was on the list, an orange tree was on the list. And in the end, they voted. And some of them were disappointed. The persimmon won. Okay, there's now now a persimmon tree in the hills of Soledad at a mission school because those kids voted. And I went and bought that tree and got to deliver that a couple weeks ago. But it is that sort of engagement where it feels real in the moment that I encourage you to look for, right? And force your elected officials or members of committees to have those conversations about what that impact looks like, because they're going to win, but the kids will also realize they shouldn't be intimidated by somebody because of a title. It's a human. I think that's the biggest point in those moments.
Share story. I have a 4-year-old granddaughter who is half Japanese and half Mexican. And when I just recently had her in, I went to visit her, she said, I learned about Martin Luther King Jr. and he said, I have a dream. This is a 4-year-old little girl, not even in kindergarten yet. That's where it starts, and I'm hoping that we all participate in that kind of learning. So I was just so impressed. When we did the water outreach before the California Coastal Commission, we made a video to show the Coastal Commission, and the mayor and I actually went to, I think it was a 3rd grade class whose teachers and parents supported this. And we ended our videos with this wonderful picture of the mayor standing behind in the middle and all the kids, and they were saying, save our water, save our shores. And it was just so incredibly moving, and we ended our videos and our statements with that. So again, you're not too young to participate, to know what's right and wrong around you.
I love it when I see young kids at a pride parade. I think it's, I love it when I've been in organizations where the members bring their young kids to our board meetings. So I just think it is a matter of exposing children as young as you can to communal events.
So this question is, how do you respond to a comment that says the two-party system is completely corrupt? Why should I vote?
Personally, I would agree, and I'd say that's why you vote, right? If you want to change it, look for those. We had a conversation, Steve and I, just before this event started about the extremes, right? So with gerrymandering, you end up where you carve up districts that are extremely safe for one party or the other, which typically the parties do together, due to the committees that get appointed. Then who wins is the person who can speak to the extremes within that new district the loudest. And what you end up with are people who look like who we currently have in Congress that are getting all the headlines, right? And I don't, you can name them, and it is wild. They're like caricatures of what folks imagine democracy should be like. But that is created by the two-party system. So I don't want to go into that, but I think that is the reason you should vote. The way you break it is by, like we said earlier, doing your research and finding those people. Back to the perfection analogy, you're never going to find a candidate who's perfect, but if they agree with you 90% of the time, that's probably your candidate. 80% of the time, probably still your candidate. Don't look at just the top line, right? Dig down deeper. Look into their backgrounds. Find out what really matters to them. But that's the reason you should vote, is to bring up those people who are more common sense.
So if you don't vote, like I said, you have to say so. There's corruption in anything you do, right? Just about everything in America is some form of corruption if you look at it from a macro level. But I don't think not voting is the answer. You vote to get those corrupt folks out of there and to move this country forward. We're a democracy today. If you don't vote, who knows what's going to turn out to be. So please vote. Please be informed. Please make educated choices. And let's go out there and get the vote.
I just re-emphasize again. I think of voting as a protective, defensive mechanism. That's really the point of view that I come from. I'm looking about what have my people or what concerns have we gotten that we already have that can be taken away. So I'm not thinking about, whether it's a Democrat or whether it's a Republican. I'm thinking about the issues. And I think that when we only think about the corruption of parties, we're forgetting all the issues that don't have to do with just, voting for an individual. There's so many things on the ballot that have to do with, issues. Yes, the parties will have stances on them, but first of all, you got to figure out where you stand. And you vote for the closest person you can, and if there's nobody there, then it's time for you to think about getting into office yourself.
So we have a law that, I don't know if it is or not, but for high school students, it's automatic voter registration if you get a driver license. And I deal a lot with Atlanta's folks, and you want to talk about our diverse population that's going to encompass everybody on this planet. And I was just wondering and curious if you would agree or not that maybe when people sign up for services, they should also be automatically registered to vote?
I think that's a great idea. The more opportunity they have to register, I think the better off we are. Because folks make excuse for anything. Or I forgot to vote. Or the game is on. Or I'm going to the concert. If you register for a service and you can register to vote at the same time, I think that's a great idea.
Coming at it with a pragmatic hat on, I agree. I think it's a great idea. But I think about where folks get services and some of the barriers, right, in those spaces already. And I would fear that asking somebody to fill out this form with 17 questions on it, or whatever that number is today, would put them off of coming in for the services that they need, right, if they don't have, and I'm particularly thinking of immigration status. Because if you don't fill that out, the person on the other side of the counter knows immediately you don't have status. So I'm thinking about the pragmatic approach and steps to not let it become a barrier in that moment to somebody who might be fearful of walking through the door. But generally, I think it would be great to keep them on the counter at all places where services are provided and let folks know. If you're not registered, it'd be a great time. Please grab one of those and we can drop the registration because it's pre-stamped, right? It's got the postmark stuff on it. We'll drop that in the mail for you, or you can leave it here in that mailbox right outside. I think that would be a great approach. But the requirement piece, I'm afraid, because we know that children are eligible for a lot of the services, but the parents cannot, in many instances, don't have status in this country.
I think I agree with that, and I think I would prefer to disconnect signing up for, and you're talking about social services mostly, the disconnect between that and your voter status. And so I hear what you're saying, but there are many ways that I don't think we have exhausted in terms of outreach to get people to vote, to register to vote. So I think we would best to pour more resources in that as opposed to connect it with services delivered. But thank you for that provocative question.
So I'm wondering, kind of in that same vein, what does civic engagement look like for folks who are undocumented? Because we have folks in this room who are undocumented, and we are asking them, stand up, raise your hand, or whatever, if you're going to vote and take somebody with you. But what does it actually look like, and how do we get them engaged? Because there's still roles for them to play, right? So.
My passion mission is immigration. So when we talk about DACA, the history, FSMA, which recently fizzled out in Congress, I think that is where the opportunity lies. The opportunity for a lot of our students who are willing to use their voice in the space and speak to who they are, the communities that created them, and who they want to be within those communities and what those barriers look like. I've heard from so many of those students who come to me to say, hey, I want to work in law enforcement, but I don't have status. I can't take that path. Now they can, as I understand, thanks to Zoe Lochran, who ran a bill who made that possible. But those pieces only happen because they were willing to engage. And often, right, perfection versus good. I'm a huge advocate of comprehensive immigration reform. I think we need it and I want to see it, but as long as we're sort of in the system where personally I feel maybe both parties are benefiting from a stalemate because both can say I'm fighting as hard to stop or to help, right, then I don't know that we're going to get there. But if we can get some of those pieces moving for those students or young people or communities who don't have status by speaking up and saying we can create a carve out, there being creative in legislation, I think, is where that opportunity is. And by using your voice, you can make that change happen for yourself and others who share your dreams.
Because I am not undocumented, I have to come at this with extreme humility, knowing that there may be things that I don't know, so forgive me for the knowledge I don't have. But it occurs to me right away that I think the only thing that perhaps this community can't do is vote, which I said is the very minimum, right? So this, I know that, in our state, which always in presidential elections always votes Democratic, that we have phone trees where we're calling into other states to supporting the candidates that we want there. So just because you can't vote doesn't mean that you can't caucus for a candidate, that you can't caucus for a cause. I think it's important for even undocumented people to think about everything that they can do and that they can support. Because voting is not the only way, your personal vote is not the only way to support a candidate that is going to make a difference in your lives.
All right, so for the young people in the room, how many of you guys are on social media? Any social media platform at all? None? So no TikTok, no Facebook, no Twitter, X, or whatever it's called now. Oh, wow. I don't know if that's good or bad. All right. So my question really is about the existential crisis we face with social media and misinformation. How do we combat that in this presidential election cycle? Because it's going to be coming at you fast and hard. There's a lot of ageism that's going to be happening. They're going to make you think that these candidates are very old and not able to serve throughout their terms. So how do you combat that in this digital space?
I think one way we do it is we go to reputable sources and not just get an email from X or Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok and think that's gospel. Be informed, do your own research, make sure you're getting the true message and not disinformation or misinformation. Check it out, 3 or 4 sources. If 3 or 4 sources saying the same thing, then it may be valid. But 3 or 4 sources, you may check out a 5th, or 4th or a 5th. But educate yourself, enlighten yourself, and inform yourself. That's what we need to do. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really serious issue for the future. We're just starting to get a flavor of that now. I know that Bill Monning, our former state senator, is now being involved in an initiative to look at the impacts of AI on not just elections, but for consumption of information from everybody and anything. And I think we're on the verge of a new revolution. Just as when computers came onto the scene, I really think that AI is a huge thing that will change so much for us, and reality then becomes so challengeable on everything, even things that we see, things that we read. It's pretty scary, but it could also be harnessed for tremendous good as well. So I think we're going to have, in place of everything else, critical thinking. You guys out there are going to have to look at something and say, really? That doesn't sound right, or, let me go research it, as we've all been seeing, but use critical thinking. Everything that you see on Facebook is not real, and you should be challenging that in yourself and thinking like that. So I think being part of the educational curriculum that you are in, hopefully you're learning how to think for yourself, learning how to look at things with a critical eye. So I think that will help inoculate us to some of the things coming in the future for us.
The thing that I worry about the most in this moment is people only being with people who think like them, or only listening to media that agrees with them. When you do that, it may feel good, but I can guarantee you that something that is, some terrible thing that's happening to conservatives is not being reported in conservative media. Some terrible stuff that liberals are doing is not being reported in liberal media. So the media that agrees with you is always going to cut out the criticism. And to make anything better, you have to expose yourself to criticism. whatever your group is. So that's the thing that worries me about, you know, all the social media. You need to be involved with stuff that you don't agree with, so you know what the other side of the argument is.
So to echo that, I'll just, my final piece will be on the sources. Pick yours, right? I know what mine are. Every morning, 5:30, I wake up, and I am that person that does what everyone says not to do. I grab my phone, I go to the New York Times. That's my first. I look at the top 10 headlines, I go to the Wall Street Journal. I go through the top 10 headlines, I go to Reuters, I go through the top 10 headlines, and then BBC. And BBC, because you get a little flavor of the international, which you'll learn if you do that we in the U.S. are extremely biased to ourselves on all those other media channels, specifically the first two. We only care about what's happening here. But when you understand the global picture and impact of those decisions, you have a better understanding. So to that question of what you do, and I agree with Kathy, AI is getting creepy. I mean, to the point that we can probably in the next few years target a single voter with knowing you're a dog lover who's probably going to vote on this issue, and we're going to send you an ad saying, that guy kicked a dog. Nobody will ever see it, but you will, and you'll think, man, screw that guy, I'm not voting for him. So the big thing is when you see something you don't like, or something you know that is not true, report it. They all have mechanisms for that. And the last piece on that, because I read all those news sources over the last few days, we know that at the Supreme Court this week there's a critical conversation happening, a decision that's going to come down around how much censorship is, if that's the correct use of the word, which I don't think it is. I mean, those companies are allowed to use on folks putting disinformation out. As much as they're saying it's about conservative viewpoints or liberal viewpoints, no. It's about accuracy. So just things to be aware of, but again, vote under the influence of information.
Okay, hashtag.
Let's go ahead and give our panelists another big round of applause. Thank you so much, and thank you all so much for being here, and definitely to all the faculty and staff who helped be part of this to make this happen. I really appreciate all of your efforts. So we hope you leave really inspired to use your voice and to use your education for positive change in our communities and in our world. Dialogue, as many of you have talked about, is so essential for being able to live within and create a more healthy and sustained democracy. Talk about the issues that you care about with family, friends, and community members. And also, it's really important for us to listen. What are all the different perspectives? What are the issues that other people care about who maybe are less familiar to us, right? And so that's really part of service and being in community. And so leaving you with these final words to just vote, right, in the upcoming elections and really encourage others to vote. And again, if you're not able to vote, or people in your family are not able to vote, there are so many other ways to support the issues, right, and to have your voices heard. So thank you to our panelists for inspiring me and for all the stories and all the different ways in which I can be more critically minded and engaged. So thank you all.